Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Barb Hannon, and I am your storyteller for this evening. And the story that I'm going to talk about is not my story. It is my parents' story. And it is a story that takes place between 1941 and 1945 during World War II. The name of my book is Letters from World War II. These are my parents on the cover here. It's my mom and my dad. This is their wedding picture from June 19th, 1943. And this picture sat in our dining room on the buffet for my entire life until my mom died. So growing up, we knew our dad was in World War II. You know, we had a picture of him in uniform, sitting on the buffet. However, growing up and until I sort of wrote this book, I and my sisters had absolutely no idea whatsoever what my parents went through in World War II. So the story is between 1941 and 1945. It's mostly a story about what happened to my dad during the war. However, it's also a story about that's very historical. The events that happened are real, they're historical. And the book is also about my mother and how she got through the war and this separation. My parents were basically separated for those 4 years. From 1941 to 1945, my parents spent about 3 weeks together as a married couple. The rest of the time, they were separated, and my dad took off less than a month after they were married to go to England and fly bombing missions over Germany. And he was basically shot down, captured in a German prison camp. My mother didn't see him for another 2 years. And for some of that time, she did not even know if he was dead or alive. I mean, it was a horrific for my dad. But the interesting thing is that their whole relationship was based on their letters to each other. That's all they had. And so the story is told through their letters. It's also told through a number of historical documents that my dad saved regarding the war. And the book is a bit of a mystery to find out what happened to him and how he got back home, how he was rescued, and how he got back home. So you'll have to read the book to find out what happened. But it is a story that I never knew. I never knew the story until about 10 years ago when my mother died. Like a lot of people in World War II who especially had a horrific time during the war, separation, the horrors of not knowing what was going on. Once they got back and the war was over, they put it all behind them and never talked about it. And a lot of World War II veterans, and including my parents, never talked about it. All these years we grew up and we had no idea what their story was. I'm not saying that we didn't know some things. We knew a few things, and my dad would make comments at times, but we didn't know the full story. But we had some hints. One of them was that our family, and I put this in the book, our family celebrated Jump Day every January 11th, every year, year after year. My dad would come down from upstairs into the kitchen and he would look at us and he'd go, "It's Jump Day, you guys. Let's have pancakes." And year after year after year, my dad would make pancakes and we'd whoop it up and say, "Great, it's Jump Day." What we knew as little kids about Jump Day was just simply that our dad jumped out of an airplane with a parachute. Jumped out of this plane with a parachute, landed in the snow. It was January. He took off his parachute, he buried it in the snow. And because he was a navigator, he had a compass, and they started walking. My dad had a compass and he said, "Walk west." And so they went west. I, of course, had no idea. We didn't know why my dad was on a plane. We didn't know why he had to jump out. We didn't know why he was walking west. We didn't know. It was just the story around Jump Day. He told us then that he was picked up by the German police and he went to a prison camp, not a prison camp. And when we asked him about prison camp, he said that they slept in cabins on bunk beds. They cooked their own food outside. They played a lot of card games and they had baseball teams. You know, to young kids, it sounded an awful lot like summer camp. So I guess in the war, our dad jumped out of a plane, picked up by the German police. Were the German police bad? Well, growing up, probably like you guys, we were told, if you're ever in trouble, find a policeman. Policeman good. So then he was in this summer camp. Never growing up did my sisters and I have any sense that maybe this was bad. It was, not a good time. It was not summer. We didn't know. They did not talk about it. My dad I was thinking the other day when it was time to go to bed at night, my dad would clap his hands and go, "Mach schnell," move fast. I remember one day any of you remember that show Hogan's Heroes? My sisters and I were watching Hogan's Heroes one night and laughing, and my dad came in the TV room and he looked for a few minutes. And then he went over and he shut the TV off and he looked at us and he said, "Don't ever watch this show. The German guards were not stupid. They were mean." And he walked out of the room and my sisters and I were like, "What? What's he talking about?" The point is, we had no idea what my parents went through. So what changed was my mother died. And after she died, my sisters and I were cleaning out the house she lived in for 60 years. We thought we knew everything that was in the house, every nook and cranny. However, In the back of her closet were 2 boxes. One of them was a cardboard box about this big top. And I took the lid off of it, and it was crammed full of letters. Look at all these letters. And I said to one of my sisters, Peg, have you seen these letters before? Look at these letters. No. And she looked at them. I picked up a packet. They were all in groups and tied with different colored ribbons. And I picked up a group of letters, and the return address was Ridgewell Air Base, Essex, England. And I thought, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This is where he was in the air base he was at in England. We didn't even know what air base he was at. And I picked up another group of letters, and they were really bizarre. There were no envelopes. They folded like this and had a tab. And they had German all over the front of it. Mit Luftposte, Stalag Lift 1, Bart, Germany. And I thought, oh my goodness, I guess Dad could write Mom from prison camp. I had no idea he could write her letters. But the last group of letters that I picked up in this box were from Camp Lucky Strike, St. Valerie, France. And I looked at my sister and went, wait, these letters are from France. Daddy was in France. What was he doing in France? How did he get to France? What? Meaning, whoa, this is all very interesting. So I put the lid back on the box and decided to take them to my house. And when I had time, I would read the letters. Then I opened the next box, and it was a wooden box with a wooden top. And I opened the box, and this box was crammed full of documents and papers and telegrams and medical records and German prisoner of war documents and German Reichsmarks and French francs. And I was just stunned. What a treasure trove of documents. I kind of went through them, and there was a commendation from Winston Churchill. His name was on it, W.C. Winston, for some bombing missions he had done. And I was like, wow. So I took these boxes to my house with the idea that I would eventually go through them and just read them and look at them. And 10 years went by. My mom died over 10 years ago. And one morning I retired, and one morning I got up and made a big pot of coffee and got these boxes, put them on the kitchen table. And I decided to go through the wooden box full of these documents first. I didn't think that I was quite ready to read the letters. And so I started with the documents, and I opened this box. And the first thing I picked up was a Western Union telegram to my mom. And it had 2 gold stars on it. And if you know anything about World War II telegrams, any telegram with 2 gold stars is from the War Department. And it said to my mother, the Secretary of War would like to inform you that your husband, Lieutenant George Hannon, has been missing over Germany since January 11th, 1944. And I looked at that, knowing Jump Day was January 11th, of course. She didn't get this telegram until the 26th of January. And then I looked at it, and it was 1944. And I guess I didn't know when he was shot down. I just knew he was shot down. And I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, January 1944, the war was over in June of 1945. My dad was in that prison camp for 16 months. That was the first sort of big shocky thing. And then I found a second telegram, and it was dated February 18th, 1944. And it was to my mother, and it had 2 gold stars on it. And it said, the Secretary of War would like to inform you that your husband, Lieutenant Hannon, is a prisoner of War of Germany as reported by the International Red Cross. And I looked at that date and I suddenly thought, my mother did not know that my dad was dead or alive for 37 days. She was a school teacher, and I thought so. I just kept thinking about her. She got up every day, had to take this bus, go teach all day, come home day after day for 37 days, and she didn't know if my dad was dead or alive. Then I found a third telegram, which was April 17th. In 1944, and it was from the War Department, and it said, your husband was a prisoner of war of the Germans at Stalag Luft 1, Bart, Germany, and you can write him at this address using POW number 2172. So I was stunned about this time period, knowing my mother. Even after she found out in February he might be a prisoner of war from information from the Red Cross, I could just see her, you guys. Where was he? It's winter. Does he have warm clothes? Does he have food? Does he have medical care? Is he injured? Where is he? So she did not know for over 4 months where he was really and what happened to him. And I then began to put together a timeline of where he was, when he got to England, how many missions he went on. My dad was a pack rat, and he saved every piece of paper. Every flight he went on, he saved. There were flight records, every flight, everywhere he bombed, how long he was on the airplane. And I became really pretty interested in the 8th Air Force. He was in the 381st Bomb Group, 533rd Squadron. So one of the first things I did was find out about this squadron and where it was, where the airbase was, what life was like for him at this airbase. So I started doing that research. And then I started doing research on Stalag Luft 1, the prison camp that he was in. There's a lot of information if you know how to hunt for it. The National Archives in Washington, D.C. has reports on every prison camp, what it was like. They were reports done with inspections during the war and after the war. Every single plane that went down in World War II has an MACR report, missing aircrew report. I got my dad's missing aircrew report to find out what happened to his plane, what was going on, why the plane almost exploded, why he had to jump out. I had no idea that there was a radio man on the plane, his plane, that did not survive. He was strafed by German fighters and killed at his desk. I just started on this investigative journey that took me 2 years. I actually got on a plane and went over to England and met with the curator of the Museum of the 8th Air Force and the 381st and learned all about what it was like for my dad. And I began to put together this story. And it was pretty amazing. I found medical records for my dad. And this is very interesting. I picked up a medical record from 1942 when he went to Santa Ana to flight school. My dad weighed 165 pounds. I picked up a medical record when he was at Camp Lucky Strike in France after the war, and my dad weighed 114 pounds. There was a notation on the medical record that he would need all of his teeth pulled in dentures because of malnutrition, had damaged his teeth. My dad was starved in this prison camp. I had no idea. No idea. And so I read about this prison camp and what happened. In this box were his original prisoner of war documents, all in German, and with his picture and his thumbprints and all in German. So I had to find somebody to translate this prisoner of war record, and he was wonderful, and he went through it with me, and he turned it over to the back of the page, and he pointed out all these dates that were on the back, and he said, these are punishments where your dad was punished for various infractions. And I said, like what? And he said, probably digging tunnels, mouthing off to a German guard, who knows? So I began to see this picture that this was not summer camp, right? And it was stunning to me. And I hadn't even opened the letters yet. So one day, with the help of my sister, we opened the box with the letters and we started reading the letters that they wrote to each other. It was very difficult. First of all, you don't expect your parents to write these intense love letters to each other. But the letters were very interesting in that the letters from England that my dad wrote, his first letters to my mother were not bad. I mean, he was talking about how fun it was to go to London, and he saw Buckingham Palace and he saw Westminster Abbey, and they'd gone to Piccadilly Circus, and it's just all interesting and fun. But as time went on, my dad's letters home to my mother from England get darker and darker. They were hard to read. He was clearly frightened every day getting up in these planes. And he wrote, "It gets hard to get in the plane sometimes, darling, but I do it, and your life hangs in the balance until you see the coast of England again. And you don't know what's going to happen, but I signed up for this, and I will do it to the best of my ability, no matter what happens." Almost a premonition, that something bad was going to happen. So I read all about the 8th Air Force. And when my dad was flying in 1943 and early 1944, that was way before the 8th Air Force had control of the skies over Germany. And these guys were just sitting ducks. It was a slaughterhouse for them. More airmen from the 8th Air Force were killed in World War II than Marines. I mean, they had a 1 in 4 chance of getting to 25 missions. And when my dad got to the 15th mission, he wrote my mom that he could count the number of missions he had left on his 2 hands. And he said, I never knew how hard it was to count to 25, one at a time. And he even was kind of optimistic when he got to 15 missions, saying, maybe I'll be home by Easter. Well, he was not home by Easter. Of course, he was shot down and captured. But even jumping out of a parachute with a parachute in a combat zone for my dad, you only had a 60% chance of reaching the ground. And the story just began to evolve. And as I read more letters, I kind of matched the letters to what was going on. My parents wrote stunning letters to each other. As horrible as things were, when you read these over 80 letters, there is not one single word of anger, not one word of this terrible war. Why did this happen? Why me? Nothing. Just these positive letters to keep each other's spirits up. Things like, you wait there, George, and I'll wait here. And one day soon, I know we'll be together forever, and we will not have to wait anymore. And their most poignant letters, I think, were every Christmas Eve they wrote each other. They were apart for 4 Christmases. And every letter on Christmas Eve, my dad would write my mom from prison camp, from England, wherever he was. My mom would write him. And they basically would say the same thing. I know in my heart that this is the last Christmas we'll be apart, and then we'll be together for every Christmas we're allowed. Just these positive letters, looking forward to the future. No whining, no anger, just we'll get there and we'll see each other again. I know we'll see each other again and we'll have a great life. And these were stunning letters that they wrote to each other without knowing. They didn't know if they'd ever see each other again. And when I look at what happened at my dad's prison camp at the end of the war and how he almost didn't get out of there, they wouldn't have been able to see each other again. So I was stunned with the story through these letters. I was stunned at the way they wrote each other, and I was pretty stunned at what happened to my dad. So what I initially wanted to do was put their story down. And I originally wanted it for their children, their grandchildren, and now their great-grandchildren. So they would know what happened and what my dad did. I consider my dad a patriot, a hero. He did this job. He was young. He was only 24 years old when he enlisted. Without question, he, like he said in his letter, I signed up for this job and I'll do it to the best of my ability. That's pretty striking thing to say for my dad. So I wrote the book, and I wrote it originally. I wanted to preserve all these incredible documents, these telegrams, these war records, these flight records, all these communications from the War Department. So I started scanning them into a desktop scanner just to make a digital file. And I used them in the book so that, probably people don't know what a World War II telegram looks like, or a flight record from Ridgewell Air Base, or a prisoner of war document ID, or what a letter looks like. That some of the letters that my dad wrote my mom were censored by the Germans. They read every letter. So some of his letters, he starts writing my mom, and then it's all blacked out, and then a few more lines, and then blacked out. They were not allowed to say anything about the prison camp. So I just believe that this is a timeless story, how to deal with separation, with some stoicism, but with some resilience, with courage, with hope. My mother, every letter was all about the future and what we're going to do, and tremendous love letters to each other. I had no idea, you guys, that they had pet names for each other. And I picked up a letter from my dad to my mom from England, and it said across the front of it, "Dear Pumpkin." I had every letter. I had no idea that they had these pet names for each other. But so I wrote the book. I think that we should not ever forget this generation, not just my parents' story, but other World War II stories. I don't think my parents' story was much different than a lot of people who were separated and didn't know what was going on. But we shouldn't ever forget this generation. They were unbelievable with their commitment, their sacrifice, their suffering. Certainly, my mother suffered not having any idea where my dad was, for that long a time, not wondering if he'd ever got out of this prison camp. He couldn't tell her what was really going on because it was censored by the Germans. She didn't know he was starving. So that's my story. I feel very strongly that these kinds of stories should be told. So my parents were just two ordinary citizens from Iowa, who extraordinary things happened to. And they dealt with it with such courage and such bravery, and never, ever a bit of anger. They just were remarkable. They were my parents. And I am very glad I told the story. So I see somebody has asked me what was the most surprising letter that I read. And I think really, the most surprising letter I read between my parents was my dad, when he flew from Grand Island, Nebraska, clear over to England. He wrote my mother this long letter about everything he saw. And he said, which I wish I could ask my mother about, he said, we flew over Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where my mom lived, at 10 o'clock in the morning. We got as low as we could and we buzzed your house 3 times. Did you see us? I read that and I thought, wow, I wish I could have asked my mom if she saw him. He said we got as low as we could. And if you have ever had the opportunity to see or hear a B-17 bomber, I know they make trips around the country. I've seen them. These things are thundering. It was a Sunday morning when my dad flew to England, a quiet summer Sunday morning. Everybody in the whole neighborhood would have heard that plane. I thought that was pretty surprising. And then he described everything that he saw. We flew over Niagara Falls. We flew over Labrador, and he said, then we flew to Ireland. We got a whole day in Ireland. We went to some Irish pubs, and then we flew over Scotland and I got us right on target, hit the nose of the target in England. So that was a wonderful letter before they started getting just a little darker. So anyway, that was my favorite letter, I think. So anybody else have a question? I hope you got some information about my book and heard a little of the story, and that's it.